Welcome back to Cindy's Library. This is Cindy, and today, in honor of Jane Austen July, let's talk about Jane Austen, guys. Now, in Jane Austen's books, we of course have our Jane Austen heroine, and each Jane Austen heroine gets her Jane Austen hero in the end, whatever we may think of it. Although, really, can't argue too much. But it didn't have to turn out that way, because for every Jane Austen heroine, there's not only a hero, there is also another guy who she could potentially have married. Now, in some cases, this is much more serious than others, but it is the case with all of them. So, let's take a look at Jane Austen's other guys, starting from the beginning. Yes, with Northanger Abbey. We have Catherine Morland. She finally ends up with Henry Tilney, but it didn't have to be that way. There was John Thorpe, friend of her brother's, so not a bad introduction as far as that goes. There's nothing to say that he isn't handsome enough, but he has a few issues. Probably the biggest one is that he doesn't really listen to anything Catherine says. Not a good basis for a relationship. And he's rather on the reckless side, as proved by his carriage driving. I guess technically it isn't a carriage. I forget what specifically it is, but think of modern guys with hot rods driving too fast. Yep. And granted, this is after Catherine had nipped everything in the bud, but, well, he exaggerated first to General Tilney Catherine's potential fortune, and after being rejected, he again exaggerated to General Tilney that Catherine was poor as a pauper. So we have some definite character flaws there. And you can't really blame Catherine for saying no. Now, he was a strong enough personality, he could have carried his day, but fortunately, although young and naive, Catherine did know her mind enough that much. I do not think it would have been a very happy marriage. So, moving over to Sense and Sensibility, where since we have the Dashwood sisters, we get 2 for 1. So let us start with Eleanor. You might not think that she has anyone else to think about besides Edward Ferrars, but there is Colonel Brandon. No one ever takes this seriously. Nothing is ever implied that they're ever more than friends. There's no one whom Colonel Austen no doubt would say he esteems more or whose opinion he respects more than Eleanor's. But that is not where his heart lies. And in the end, that is okay. If Marianne had not been in the scene, who knows? As Aslan says in the Chronicles of Narnia, you're only told your own story, not what would have happened. Bad paraphrase, but that's basically what he says. Which leaves us with Marianne and Willoughby. Yep. Now, he does give a defense of his horrible actions to Marianne. He was in a difficult position, even if he had put himself in it. And there is evidence that he really did have some feelings for Marianne. So you'll give him a tiny bit of credit for that. But not clearly stating what his position was with Marianne from the first. Granted, the day he was finally going to do that, lots of things happened to prevent that. But he should have been very clear from that point on what his position was. He wasn't, and so then Marianne finally encounters him again at that ball or party or whatever it was. Oh, expecting happy things, not knowing it was a complete disaster, really, for both of them. Ill done, Willoughby. And then the whole thing with Colonel Brandon's ward and Willoughby. Now, people can repent and change. That is true. Have we truly seen any repentance or change from Willoughby? Within the story, I do not think so. And it even says in the story, Marianne even acknowledges that if she had learned about all of this after getting married to Willoughby, she would have been miserable. So thank goodness nothing did happen in the end that way, no matter how painful in the interim it was for Marianne. Much better with Colonel Brandon, and Eleanor is perfectly happy with Edward Ferrars no matter what we think, so who are we to complain? Next, we have Pride and Prejudice. We this time have 5 sisters, but I guess the 2 main ones are Elizabeth and Jane. Elizabeth finally in the end gets her Mr. Darcy, and Jane gets her Mr. Bingley, and we are all happy for them at the end. But it did not have to be that way. This is an interesting one because we have 2 potentials here. One of which works for both Jane and Elizabeth, and one that works for only Elizabeth. One that would work for Jane and Elizabeth is Mr. Collins. There had been no Mr. Bingley. Jane is the first person Mr. Collins would have set his heart on. And Mr. Collins, it would be wrong to say he is exactly a bad man. After all, we don't see him doing anything particularly bad. Not like Willoughby, for example. But would anyone besides Charlotte Lucas really want to marry him? Jane, it would not be so bad. Jane is so sweet, tempered, and compliant. She would have made it work. Would she have been truly happy knowing Mr. Collins and being under the eye of Lady Catherine de Bourgh? No, more often than not, as long as they lived at the vicarage at Rosings. Even Jane might have felt the strain of both of those things after a while. As for Lizzie, well, there's a very good reason she gave Mr. Collins the answer she gave him, in spite of the fact that she would then be giving up a very advantageous uh, economic and social position, because she would have found it intolerable. And I'm not sure about Mr. Collins, what her strategy for dealing with him would have been. But I suspect her only way of dealing with Lady Catherine de Bourgh would have been setting her ladyship off. She would have been clever and careful, not done anything that would have reflected on Mr. Collins. But I can just imagine that happening, and that would not have been good for anyone. In fact, that would have been rather a marriage for her like her father's with her mother's, with the positions reversed. And that was not the most happy of marriages, sadly. So, the other potential, of course, is Mr. Wickham. Handsome enough, charming enough, socially outgoing, knows the right things to say. All of that looks good on paper, but when you dig into his past, I don't know that Elizabeth would have in some ways taken such a revelation quite to heart if it had happened after her marriage, as Marianne would have with Willoughby. But that doesn't mean that Elizabeth would have been happy about the situation at all. Far from it. So, we will leave Elizabeth with Mr. Darcy and Jane with Mr. Bingley, and they will be happy that way. Next, Mansfield Park, where we have the very quiet and timid Fanny Price and Edmund Bertram. Some people think that Edmund isn't exciting enough, but really, we're talking Fanny here. She doesn't want excitement. So perhaps it is just as well things turned out that way and she did not end up with Henry Crawford. Handsome enough, certain Fanny would be the first one to admit that. And he certainly knows how to be social, she could not deny that. Oh, but. A side that is unkind, doesn't think about others, jokes about serious things, none of that Fanny Price appreciates. Now, we will give Henry Crawford a bit of credit. Once Fanny caught his eye, and he wasn't just playing. He learned to see her good points, and I think he really did learn a few things from her. Would that it could have continued. But there are several strikes against him. The first being his lifestyle. Granted, he says he likes being out in the country if it's with Fanny and the Bertrams. And I think there is some truth to that. And there is some truth. He has some pride in his estate. But how long do you really think it's going to be before he wants to go to town again? Or do the social rounds visiting various houses? the houses of his friends in various places in England. I don't say that Fanny objects necessarily to some traveling. She did enjoy the little trip to, what's his name's estate. But we're talking Fanny here, a homebody if ever there was one. She would be completely miserable in town and only slightly less miserable in a house full mostly of strangers. So on that level, I do not think it would have worked out. And then we had seen some surface level changes from Henry in a positive direction. But here's the question. After their marriage, the next time he sees Maria, the former Maria Bertram, he would probably start by behaving himself, both for Fanny's sake and for his own. But that's how it started in the book, too. Maria saw that. She was mad about that, and so started basically flirting with him. And we know how that ended up. And even married, how long do you think it would take for Henry Crawford to end up in the exact same situation, even married to Fanny? The one thing that might have happened is if Fanny was there and she saw things and said, let's leave, and he actually did. But too great a chance for someone like Fanny. She's much better off with Edmund Bertram, surrounded by surroundings that are familiar and comfortable to her, and with people she loves. So the next one is Emma, from Emma, of course. Emma Woodhouse, pretty, clever, and rich. Only Mr. Knightley sees through her, and so that way they are a very good pair. And I think Mr. Knightley does learn one or two things from Emma. But it didn't have to be that way, because we have Mr. Elton, the local vicar, who's certainly handsome enough, perfect manners in society. Conversation is not quite so good as Mr. Knightley, that's what Emma would probably say. Certain coarseness to him. But after the Christmas party with the, what are their names? The starts with a W. It's on the tip of my tongue. Weston's. That's it. After the party at the Weston's and his proposal and refusal, he shows his true colors. I can appreciate him being embarrassed by the whole situation. Emma herself isn't quite embarrassed beneath all of her indignation that he should propose to her. He turns it into coldness towards Emma and active unkindness towards poor Harriet, who Emma had matched up with him and he did not like. Granted, from what I know, the Mrs. Elton, whom he soon married, did not help the situation. But no, Emma would not have been happy with someone who could be so unkind to someone she cared about. No, indeed. She's much better off with Mr. Knightley, no matter what Mr. Elton may have thought. That leads us to Persuasion, and Elliot, and Captain Wentworth. Second Chance Love and The Letter. They're perfect for each other based on that. But again, it did not have to be. There was the option of Mr. Elliot, the heir to Sir Walter's estate and title. So technically he was a cousin, and I know we feel uncomfortable about such things these days. But leaving that aside for one moment, let's take a look at Mr. Elliot. Handsome, perfect manners. He knows how to have a good conversation. He fits it to whoever he's talking to. So on the surface, this doesn't look like a bad setup, especially since Anne would, by marrying him, would get to go back to her ancestral home that she's had to leave. And so, fair enough, that would be a true benefit. Anne would appreciate that aspect. Until we find out what Mr. Elliot is really like. Well, ignoring the head of the family for years. The only reason he's paying attention now is because he wants something. And then encouraging Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Now, granted, they sound like they were rather naive, but still, Mr. and Mrs. Smith were induced by him to, I'm not sure they went as far as gambling, but certainly spending far, far beyond their means. And after Mr. Smith died and Mrs. Smith needed his help, did he help? No, he refused to lift a finger for her, and a finger would have been all he needed to lift. And let's not forget his, shall we say, interest in Anne's oldest sister Elizabeth's companion. Forget her name for the moment, but playing games with her when he's thinking about courting Anne, that does not sound like the recipe for a happy marriage at all. So, looking at all of our Austen heroines and their heroes, and the other guy that they could have potentially married, is there anyone that would have actually been actively happy? I think there could have been deep affection between Colonel Brandon and Eleanor. But I'm not sure that she would ever have excited his affections the way Marianne clearly did. So yes, let's leave our Austen heroines with our Austen heroes and let them live happily ever after, or as much as one can in Austen's world, which for the most part, in these cases, I have high hopes for. I really do. So, what do you think? Do you have different opinions? Did I miss any other possible other guys in any of Austen's novels? Thank you so much for stopping by. Truly do appreciate it. So until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy and happy reading.